Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Breathing Room, a space where people of color and faith can come together to have our lived experiences acknowledged, to witness each other's journey, and to take a collective deep breath. My name is Kevin Holland. This is episode 11, and the title is Promote Justice, Be an Antiracist. We'll end this season with this episode, and once again, I can't thank you enough for all the kind words that you have spoken, all of you that have listened, all of you that have shared different episodes with friends or family members, those of you that have taken the time to write a review, and I know that's no small thing. With so much going on, it takes a lot. So I want to say thank you, and this journey is just beginning. My heart is full. It's been broken by God, and the Spirit has given me a vision to be one small part of what He is doing to protect those whom He loves that bear His image, that are vulnerable because of the color of their skin in a society designed to subjugate them. Jemar Tisby, author of The Color of Compromise, The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism and How to Fight Racism, wrote this in his first book. Throughout the course of U.S. history, when Christians had the opportunity to decisively oppose the racism in their midst, all too often they chose silence. They chose passivity. The refusal to act in the midst of injustice is itself an act of injustice. Indifference to oppression perpetuates oppression. Learn to do good. Commit yourselves to seeking justice. Make right for the world's most vulnerable, the oppressed, the orphaned, the widow. Isaiah 1 verse 17, Voice Translation. That word that's translated seek in the Hebrew is the word darash. It means to resort to seek with care, to inquire, to consult, to investigate, to ask for, to demand, to practice, to study, to follow, to seek with application. Different translations say it different ways. Some say seek justice. One says treat people fairly. The New American Bible Revised Edition says make justice your aim. The New English translation says promote justice. But I really like the Voice translation where it says commit yourselves to seeking justice. And in none of these descriptives do you get a passive stance. When it comes to the pursuit of justice on behalf of the oppressed, the directives from the Hebrew Scriptures and from Jesus in the New Covenant do not communicate that we should be passive in this area, but for centuries Christians have, and for decades we have as individual Christians and as a fellowship of churches. Well, the time has come to repent of that and to change that. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. Luke 4, verses 18 and 19, New Living Translation. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Matthew 23:23 through 24, NIV. So that this episode doesn't go too long, I'm not going to say a lot. I have excerpts of speeches or sermons from 3 different people that I want you to listen to. First, listen to Rick Warren, pastor of Saddleback Church, in a message to his staff that he gave earlier this year. He announced his retirement and shared 11 reasons why he felt confident that now was the right time to begin the transition. I'd encourage you to listen to the entire message on YouTube, but for the purposes of this podcast, I recorded an excerpt. It speaks to his conviction of the need to not just not be a racist church, but to become an anti-racist church. Listen to this.
But do not underestimate all the time that we spent dealing with racial insensitivity. For many of us, dealing and confronting insensitivity, prejudice, not being aware of how other people feel, that was a first-time experience. And the gut level of those 17 hours in the first batch, and I think about 10 hours in the second batch, when we were dealing with Asian and Hispanic issues. I don't know, honestly, I don't know any staff in America that probably had those kind of gut-level discussions the way we did, the way you did. I don't know, honestly, I say it without fear of being contradicted. Where would you find another staff where we were weeping with each other? Where we were saying, people were saying, I had no idea of the pain you were carrying. Where people spilled their guts and could lay their heads down on the table and weep, and the rest of us empathized and felt that. That built a unity, built a harmony, built a connection that our staff had never had. Okay, very, very important. So the combination of COVID, not being able to see each other, the tool of Zoom, and then dealing with a most fundamental issue, identity. Who am I? And race is a part of your identity, obviously, a big part of your identity. And dealing with that, and the camaraderie, and the way we supported each other, the way you prayed for each other, the way you owned up to your own insensitivity, spoke volumes to me. And I just thought, these guys are further ahead than anybody I know. Okay, are we where we want to be in being an anti-racist church? Are we where we want to be as an all-nation congregation? Are we yet the model we want to be? No, but guys, thank God we're not what we were. Okay, thank God we're not what we were. We're getting ready to where we're going to be. We've moved forward, and there's no turning back. We're never turning back to insensitivity.
In addition to Rick Warren, one of the pastors I've learned the most from is Andy Stanley. I don't think you'll hear a better communication of what I think the Spirit is calling all of us as individual Christians to in our churches than the one he gave in June of 2020. Once again, you can find it on YouTube. The title is This Human Race. Here's an excerpt.
Jesus, who on his final pre-crucifixion night replaced all 10 commandments with one commandment, a better commandment, a new commandment. He reduced all of life. This isn't an exaggeration. He reduced all of life to one transgenerationally relevant, unchangeable command that has the potential to change everything in spite of how things change. A new commandment, he said, a new commandment I give you, love one another. Of course, that wasn't new, but of course, he wasn't through. He defined it for us. As I have loved you. This is his definition. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. This was a new command. Jesus followers, this was not a new suggestion. It was so central. He said this, you remember this. By this one thing, not 10 things, not 600 things. By this one thing, you will know, people will know that you are my disciples if you love one another as I have loved you. So, how should people who don't look like you experience you like that? How should people who don't look like me experience me like that? Then the Apostle Paul comes along and he elaborates on the one another part of this. He says, do you want to know what it looks like to love people who don't look like you? Do you want to know what it looks like to take Jesus' new covenant command seriously? He says, here's what it looks like. Here's a good place to begin. Carry one another's burdens. That's what Christ did for you. That's what the Jesus brand of love looks like. When you do this, Paul says, when you do this in this way, you will actually fulfill the law of Christ. When we choose to carry someone's burdens, think about this. When we choose to carry another person's burdens, what divides us diminishes, and what unites us surfaces. Because when you choose to carry my burden, you'll have a better understanding of where I sit and consequently why I stand where I do. And I'll gain a better understanding of you as well. Carry someone's burdens and you will fear less, you'll understand more, you'll mistrust less, you'll trust more. And when the concerns of others concern you and you act, you are fulfilling the law of Christ. When the concerns of others become my concerns and I act on those concerns, I am fulfilling the law of Christ. And when the law of Christ informs our collective conscience, or imagine this, when the law of Christ informs our national conscience, we will find common ground even when we don't share common culture or a common experience. And here's the thing. You'll know you're getting this right when white culture and black culture become secondary to the one another culture introduced by Jesus. See, here's the thing. When a slice of my culture gets in the way of loving and valuing another human being, that slice of my culture must be temporarily or even perhaps permanently retired. Otherwise, I'll just be content with sad. Otherwise, I'll never step over the line to carry your burden. So, I want to get awkwardly practical for just a minute. Because in the messy middle, when the circles come together, when the facts come together, it's always going to be a little bit awkward. So what does the Jesus brand of love look like in our current context? How should it shape how people who don't look like you experience you? How should it shape how people who don't look like us experience us? Two things. First, and this is certainly not original with me, it is not enough not to be a racist. It is not enough not to be a racist. Non-racist is not the goal. Being non-racist does nothing to address racism. Practically speaking, it amounts to indifference toward racism. If you're a Jesus follower, we must be anti-racism. Just like you're anti-child abuse. Think about it. You wouldn't walk by somebody abusing a child and think to yourself, I'm not a child abuser. You wouldn't walk by and think to yourself, I'm not a child abuser, and say nothing or do nothing. We must be anti-racism like we're anti-bullying, like we're anti-voter fraud, like we're anti-whatever it is that gets you worked up. I mean, think about it this way. If you're a parent, as a parent, I wasn't content to simply be non-liar. I was anti-lie. I did not put up with it in my children and our family, right? I wasn't content with being non-disrespectful to Sandra. I was anti-disrespect to Sandra. There was zero tolerance for disrespecting Sandra in our household. When you are anti-something, you address it when you see it. You speak up when you hear it. And to carry somebody's burdens, is to get up underneath the weight of their burden. And when we decide to carry the burden of anyone who has been discriminated against for any reason, we won't be silent, because now it's our burden. But I got to warn you, speaking from personal experience, I'll own this. Whether you're white or brown or black, when you shift from non-racist to anti-racist, you may discover something disturbing about you. You may discover a racist in the mirror. You may discover subtle versions of racism that have been hiding, even masquerading as virtues, buried in the recesses of your heart. Racism you were completely unaware of until you decided to say something, correct something, or apologize for something. For some of us, the truth is, when it comes to our hearts, racism will never be rooted out until we are willing to speak out. So, when it comes to the variables you have control over, how do people who don't look like you experience you? And would you, regardless of the color of your skin, decide not to be content with merely being a non-racist? Will you decide to make the shift to anti-racism, anti-discrimination? Will you stop, and I'm sorry to push so hard, but would you please stop with but I love everybody, and would you go out and love somebody who doesn't look like you, who doesn't experience the world the way that you do? In other words, will you follow Jesus?
So moving to hear from two prominent white pastors, one of whom has stated that he's a Republican, the call to become anti-racist. This last interview that I want you to listen to features Ibram X. Kendi. Dr. Kendi is an American author, professor, anti-racist activist, and historian. He is the director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University and the author of several books, including How to Be an Anti-Racist, and a book that many of us in our church read through last year, through which the Spirit changed many of us forever, called Stamped from the Beginning: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. He's being interviewed, and the title is The Difference Between Being Not Racist and Antiracist. It's a TED Talk interview that was conducted on June 17th of 2020. You can find it in its entirety on YouTube, but I do want you to listen to this excerpt.
So welcome, Ibram, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Chloe and Whitney, and thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation. And so a few weeks ago, on the same day we learned about the brutal murder of George Floyd, we also learned that a white woman in Central Park who chose not to leash her dog and was told by a black man nearby that she needed to leash her dog, instead decided to threaten this black male, instead decided to call the police and claim that her life was being threatened. And of course, when we learned about that through a video, many Americans were outraged. And this woman, Amy Cooper, ended up going on national TV and saying, like countless other Americans have said right after they engaged in a racist act, I am not racist. And I say countless Americans because when you really think about the history of Americans expressing racist ideas, supporting racist policies, you're really talking about a history of people who have claimed they're not racist, because everyone claims that they're not racist, whether we're talking about the Amy Coopers of the world, whether we're talking about Donald Trump, who right after he said that majority black Baltimore is a rat and rodent-infested mess that no human being would want to live in, and he was challenged as being racist. He said, actually, I'm the least racist person anywhere in the world. And so really the heartbeat of racism itself has always been denial. And the sound of that heartbeat has always been, I'm not racist. And so what I'm trying to do with my work is to really get Americans to eliminate the concept of not racist from their vocabulary and realize we're either being racist or anti-racist. We're either expressing ideas that suggest certain racial groups are better or worse than others, superior or inferior than others. We're either being racist or we're being anti-racist. We're expressing notions that the racial groups are equals, despite any cultural and ethnic differences. We're either supporting policies that are leading to racial inequities and injustice, like we saw in Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was murdered, or we're supporting policies and pushing policies that are leading to justice and equity for all. And so I think we should be very clear about whether we're expressing racist ideas, about whether we're supporting racist policies, and admit when we are. Because to be anti-racist is to admit when we expressed a racist idea, is to say, you know what, when I was doing that in Central Park, I was indeed being racist, but I'm going to change. I'm going to strive to be anti-racist. And to be racist is to constantly deny the racial inequities that pervade American society, to constantly deny the racist ideas that pervade American minds. And so I want to build a just and equitable society. And the only way we're going to even begin that process is if we admit our racism and start building an anti-racist world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Your book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, has become a bestseller in light of what's been happening. And you've been speaking a bit to, the ways in which anti-racism and racism are the only two polar opposite ways to hold a view on racism. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what the basic tenets of anti-racism are for people who aren't as familiar with it in terms of how they can be anti-racist.
Sure. And so I mentioned in my talk that the heartbeat of racism is denial. And really the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession, is the recognition that to grow up in this society is to literally, at some point in our lives, probably internalize ideas that are racist, ideas that suggest certain racial groups are better or worse than others. And because we believe in racial hierarchy, because Americans have been systematically taught that Black people are more dangerous, that Black people are more criminal-like, when we live in a society where Black people are 40% of the national incarcerated population, that's going to seem normal to people. When we live in a society, in a city like Minneapolis, where Black people are 20% of the population, but more than 60% of the people being subjected to police shootings, it's going to seem normal. And so to be anti-racist is to believe that there's nothing wrong or inferior about Black people or any other racial group. There's nothing dangerous about Black people or any other racial group. And so when we see these racial disparities all around us, we see them as abnormal. And then we start to figure out, okay, what policies are behind so many Black people being killed by police? What policies are behind so many Latinx people being disproportionately infected with COVID? How can I be a part of the struggle to upend those policies and replace them with more anti-racist policies?
And so it sounds like you do make that distinction then between not racist and anti-racist. And I guess could you talk a little bit more about that and break that down? What is the difference between the two?
In the most simplest way, a not racist is a racist who is in denial. And an anti-racist is someone who is willing to admit the times in which they're being racist and who is willing to recognize the inequities and the problems of racial problems of our society, and who is willing to challenge those racial inequities by challenging policy. And so I'm saying this because literally slaveholders, slave traders, imagine that their ideas in our terms were not racist. They would say things like Black people are the cursed descendants of Ham and they're cursed forever into enslavement. I'm not racist. This is God's law. They would say things like, based on science, based on ethnology, based on natural history, Black people by nature are predisposed to slavery and servility. This is nature's law. I'm not racist. I'm actually doing what nature said I'm supposed to be doing. And so this construct of being not racist and denying one's racism goes all the way back to the origins of this country.
Yeah. And why do you think it has been so hard for some people now to still accept that neutrality is not enough when it comes to racism?
I think because it takes a lot of work to be anti-racist. You have to be very vulnerable, right? You have to be willing to admit that you were wrong. You have to be willing to admit that if you have more, if you're white, for instance, and you have more, it may not be because you are more. You have to admit that, you've worked hard potentially in your life, but you've also had certain advantages which provided you with opportunities that other people did not have. You have to admit those things. And it's very difficult for people to be publicly and even privately self-critical. I think it's also the case of, and I should have probably led with this, how people define racist. And so people tend to define racist as like a fixed category, as an identity. This is essential to who a person is. If someone becomes a racist. And so therefore, and then they also connect a racist with a bad, evil person. They connect a racist with a Ku Klux Klansman or woman. They're like, I'm not in the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not a bad person. And I've done good things in my life. I've done good things to people of color. And so therefore, I can't be racist. I'm not that. That's not my identity. But that's actually not how we should be defining racist. Racist is a descriptive term. It describes what a person is saying or doing in any given moment. And so when a person in one moment is expressing a racist idea, in that moment, they're being racist when they're saying Black people are lazy. If in the very next moment, they're appreciating the cultures of Native people, they're being anti-racist.
Earlier this year, there was a remarkable 3-day conference put on by the Teleos Society called Let Justice Roll. And there were about 40 scholars and teachers and pastors and evangelists and people from all walks of life. They taught lessons, and the keynote mic drop message was given by Fred Gray, who was a living civil rights icon. He was a civil rights attorney that represented Rosa Parks. He also is a Church of Christ elder and leading civil rights icon who fought segregation in the 50s and 60s. At the end of his remarks, he gave us some takeaways that I thought were really profound. Here they are. Number 1, recognize that racism and inequality are alive and are still wrong. 2, develop a plan by which racism and inequality can be eradicated. We can end it if we want to. 3, you must execute the plan. And then 4, you as an individual must do your part to eradicate racism and inequality. So what are we going to do? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Well, one of the things I'm really looking forward to is partnering with the Racial Justice Unity Center. I want to encourage you to go to their website. It's rjuc.org. And on their About Us page, they say, the RJUC is a collaborative effort by hundreds of Christians across the U.S. We are working together with the help of the body of Christ to make progress toward biblical racial justice and unity. The RJUC is facilitated by Renew Partnerships, a Christian ministry founded in 2006. Our organization has enjoyed helping thousands of individuals and organizations. They believe in restoration through Jesus Christ. They believe Christians are called to follow the example and teachings of Jesus. They believe in the authority of the Bible. They believe working toward racial justice and unity is encouraged by Scripture. And then they list a myriad of verses. I got to meet with 2 of their project directors and coaches a couple of months ago. They said that they're coming online full bore by August 1st of this year. And I told them that I'm really eager to partner with them and to develop a mentoring relationship and a coaching relationship so they can help guide anyone that's interested and me in helping build a ministry of disciples who are promoting justice, disciples who are seeking justice, disciples who are proactive, who are active, who are outspoken, who are unapologetically, deliberately working to dismantle white supremacy and oppose racism in all of its forms. If you're interested in being a part of a community and a ministry and a team and a fellowship of Jesus followers, of disciples who promote justice and are anti-racist, and you feel led by the Spirit to join, then email me at thebreathingroompod@gmail.com. Again, that's thebreathingroompod@gmail.com. So what are we going to do with it? Are we going to be those that do nothing, or are we going to be disciples who promote justice? Are we going to just be adjusted to and comfortable with white supremacy, or are we going to seek to dismantle it? As I said, this is the last episode in this season. We've talked through some really tough stuff, but I do feel hope in my heart that any progress that's made, however small, however incremental, however incidental, is still progress that wouldn't have been made were it not for people deciding it's time to speak up and stand up and do something. Spirit, lead us to help build a church that doesn't settle for not being racist, but that is actively and decisively anti-racist, to build Jesus followers who promote justice, who protect the oppressed, and ensure that they receive justice. Jesus, we do believe. Help us overcome our unbelief. Help us to love more like you love and become more like you are. Thanks again for spending some time in the Breathing Room, a space where people of color and faith can come together to have our lived experiences acknowledged, to witness each other's journey, and to take a collective deep breath. Be sure to subscribe to the Breathing Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or however you listen. And if you like this episode, don't forget to leave a rating and a review. To connect with us, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or send us an email at thebreathingroompod@gmail.com. For The Breathing Room, I'm Kevin Holland, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.